Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Lean Publishing Tip of the Day, where we're going to be talking about what it's like, some advice to talk to when you're talking to journalists and other people in the media and stuff like that. If you've self-published a book or books, um, just the usual housekeeping for anyone who's joining us live. For the first 2 minutes, we just kind of talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today and things like that. And then at the 2 minute mark, we just start talking about the actual tip of the day, because that way gives people time to join. And anybody who's watching the recording can just skip to 2 minutes and get over this stuff. As always, there is a blog post that accompanies the live stream. So you can find this on our blog at leanpub.com/blog. If you don't see this blog post there, just click the magnifying glass and search for the keywords and you'll find it. The best way to watch us, to live stream us, is on YouTube. It's our recommendation because we're trying to grow our audience there. If you're a Lean Pub author and you subscribe, you're going to help both other authors and yourself get discovered. So that's great. But you can also watch us live on Instagram and LinkedIn and on X currently. We might add TikTok and stuff like that. Who knows what we're going to be doing in the future. But the main idea of these lean publishing tips of the day is to provide, obviously fun live stream if you've managed to catch it, but more importantly, a living kind of, permanent resource for people to find, on our blog or elsewhere, so that if they're interested in learning about what we have to say on a certain topic, you can find it and watch it anytime at your convenience. Again, we're on Instagram and X and LinkedIn and YouTube, and we'll add more channels in the future. If there are any channels you'd like us to be on that we're actually not currently on, and you're watching this recording later on, or you're not on your favorite social media channel when you're watching us live, please let us know. And we will think about adding that. For example, I think we have an old Twitch account or something like that that's rather unused. So let's do the countdown. It's 3, 2, 1. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Lean Publishing Tip of the Day. Today we're going to be talking about interacting with journalists and the media as a book author. This is one of those sort of interesting topics where, if you're just starting out, you might be, oh, wow, it's amazing. If I'm going to be self-publishing a book, I'm going to be famous. Typically, that's not the case. Actually, what'll happen is you'll publish your book, and the attention you're going to get is going to correlate almost entirely with how much work you put into getting attention for your book. Obviously, if you already have a network like on LinkedIn or a newsletter or something like that, or you're already famous, and so, maybe not necessarily famous, but like well-known in your subject area, there will be a kind of natural or organic book promotion that happens by word of mouth and things like that. But the work of getting yourself and your work noticed is your job. Also, of course, unless you have someone that you've paid to do it, but it's your job. And one sort of dimension of getting attention for yourself and your book, particularly we're at Lean Pub, obviously we focus on nonfiction books, is talking with journalists. Now, I have myself made mistakes over the years, and I've seen lots of other people make mistakes. The number one thing to think about when you're thinking about contacting a journalist is, well, actually, the first thing is to have a spreadsheet. I specifically recommend a spreadsheet. This is actually something that book professionals and PR people do, because it has rows and columns: rows for the contact person, columns for the details. So like name, first name, like full name, first name, organization, like what newspaper do they work for, or what website, their website profile page, if they have one on there, their email address, which, by the way, are usually easy to find for journalists. And then maybe their social media profiles, things like that. You want also a link to a relevant article, which I'll be talking about in a second. So you want to start building a spreadsheet of journalists to contact. So that's the number one thing: build a spreadsheet. The second thing is, when you're actually contacting a journalist, remember that you're talking to a professional they've got their own life. Essentially when you contact them, it's kind of like, not like knocking on their front door to sell them something, but it's like knocking on their office door, and with something to tell them, and you're interrupting them. They've got something else that they're doing. They've got plans for their day, personal and professional and stuff like that. So you're interrupting somebody when you contact a journalist. Keep that in mind. You're interrupting a professional who gets interrupted with probably dozens or hundreds of these kinds of contacts every day. They'll probably filter a lot, but whether they've got sort of auto filtering on or not, they will know right away if they're looking at a lazy canned response. Never ever send a journalist a canned email. If you're going to bother to contact, it's kind of like a false economy or false time saving. You're going to alienate them. They're going to see it. They're going to know right away, and they're not going to read it. They're not going to be interested in you. So what you want to do is you want to take the time if you're contacting a journalist, to write a customized message for them. And the source of that customized message is two things. One, your knowledge of them. Doesn't take that long, just take a couple minutes. You read their profile, right? That's kind of enough. The second thing is you've actually read a recently published article by them on a relevant topic. That's the most important thing, and that you want to have a link and maybe the title to that article as well in your spreadsheet. So what you want to do when you contact a journalist is you want to make sure it's customized. It's not a canned email. You reference something specifically that they wrote recently that you actually think is relevant and enjoyed, and cite that right away. And again, it's not because now they're going to love you. Oh, I've got a fan. It's like, this is a real person talking to me about, like, who knows what my interests are. Um, and the second thing to think about when you're contacting them is why. Why are you contacting them? If you're contacting them because you think they're gonna drop tools and go to their editor and go, wow, we've got a new block, cancel all our plans, we've got a new front page story. That's not why you should be contacting a journalist. That's not going to happen. The reason you're typically going to be contacting a journalist is ideally, hopefully, basically just to introduce yourself to them. You want them to know who you are, to know that maybe and that you've got something interesting to say about topics that they write about, specifically something recently that they've written about. It may be that they don't reply to you, but if you've got a good, typically relatively brief, punchy, direct email that says, "Hey, by the way, I read really loved your recent article about this. One thing that people don't normally talk about is this, and here's why they don't talk about it." And then you can, at the end, if you want to, you can be like, "I write about this in my book, blah blah blah." Right? So at that, what you're thinking about there is, of course, you're promoting your book, but what you want them to know is you're an author of a book on this topic that they write about and you have something interesting to say. They might not reply to you. They might reply to you, um, and but and, one version of it is that you're in their head, and maybe a month from now, 2 months from then, a year from them, they'd be like, "Who was that person who emailed me about that subject? They were an author who writes about this thing." So that's actually a really good, important thing to keep in mind. What are you doing it there? It's basically to introduce yourself. It's not to have them drop all their plans and publish a New York Magazine profile about you or anything like that. So essentially, you want to get into their contacts, which is what I write about here. Um, I brought up an example, actually, a working example of this. So let me just share a screen here. So a few years ago, let's share this screen. On The Atlantic, a journalist named Alana Samuels wrote an article about the authors who love Amazon. The e-commerce giant has finally made self-publishing lucrative, but does its dominance come at a cost? So as a LeanPub co-founder, I'm like, oh, someone's writing about self-publishing in a very prominent magazine. This is a really interesting opportunity. So obviously it's just interesting in itself, but like, so imagine you've written a self-published book on nonfiction topic, and you see an article exactly about the kind of thing that you're writing about. This is great. Put that person in your spreadsheet. First thing, read the article, read it at least once, read it carefully. And then think about something and if you've got nothing to say, you've got nothing to say. But if you can think of something to say, something they don't cover, what you want to do is you want to do something like what I did. But I'm just going to share this tab instead. So here's an article that I wrote a while ago for the Help Center, pretty long article. It's part one, part two hasn't been published yet, but this is an article about how to market a book you haven't published yet. That's actually a really important topic that can be very deep for self-published authors, and is especially important on LeanPub, where as soon as you create a book, you have a public landing page where people can sign up to be notified when the book is published, things like that. But obviously there's pre-sales. We don't have pre-sales on LeanPub, but that's a big part of self-publishing if you're in this, or normal publishing if you're in the publishing world. So the idea of marketing a book before it's finished is actually a really important thing in the book world these days. And obviously in the conventional sense, you line up things for a book launch, things like that. With LeanPub, since you can publish your book in progress, serially or chapter by chapter, every time you publish a new version, that's kind of a little mini book launch. So timing of things is a little bit different. But in any case, in this article about how to market a book that you haven't published yet, I talk a little bit about contacting journalists, like I am in this live stream, and I show the example. So there was that article in The Atlantic, and then I took my time and I wrote an email to the journalist, basically saying, I here we go. Like, I enjoyed your recent article about Amazon and self-publishing. So first of all, polite, but right away I'm saying, I know who you are. I'm not contacting you for no reason or randomly out of the blue. And I mentioned that I want to share a couple of thoughts about one of the issues with KDP that rarely gets discussed. So, there's your genuine hook right there. I've got something that's rarely discussed. And then, as I recall, I'm just sort of scanning it here, but I talk about basically pricing and Amazon KDP's pricing model, and how that sort of like, kind of discourages. In a sense, it kind of discourages, not to digress, it discourages people from publishing professional, high quality nonfiction books on Amazon KDP because they punish you for charging more than $9.99, or at least they did back in those days. But if you're interested, you can find this article on our Help Center, How to Market a Book That Hasn't Been Published Yet, Part One. And you can see the example of my letter there. And although I don't have a current subscription to The Atlantic, the great thing is my letter got published. And I think it was either the journalists themselves or an assistant saw the email, and they actually published it as a letter to the editor. Key thing to note there is I didn't say, "Hi, I'm writing a letter to the editor." I didn't do that at all. It was just my email was good enough that someone thought, "Oh, we should share the whole thing." So think about that when you're writing, emails to journalists, or messages to direct messages or something like that to journalists. Write something as high quality as you can, as usable by them as you can, and hopefully you might even have a quote in there that they can use if they're writing a new article on that topic or something like that. Moving on from there, something that's talking to journalists and people who contact you. So, in a sense, maybe lucky you've been contacted by a journalist who's like, "Oh, hey, I'm writing an article on such and such. I know you published a book on this topic," and they're going to be talking to you. So, the first thing to say is, I'm going to say, it's a negative thing. Negative, not in the sense of being necessarily bad, but it's a don't kind of comment. You can always say no comment if you're walking down the street, if you get a phone call, whatever. If you get an email, if you get direct messaged, if you get mentioned on social media about journalists trying to, or media or PR people trying to talk to you about something, and this is professional advice that I got once at my point in my career, you don't have to answer any question. You just don't have to. So always keep that in mind. You are your own person. You don't have to answer a question that you're asked. If you're flummoxed, if you're worried, if you're nervous, whatever, you can always just say no comment. Just don't forget that. The second thing is stay on topic and speak professionally. Uh, um, what you want to do is, again, it's this same thing, is you want to get quoted. You want people to see you as an expert in this area. So don't get all promotion-y. What you want to do in this circumstance is to be respected and come across as someone who knows what they're talking about. That's the most important thing. Ideally, you become a go-to person for the journalist whenever this topic or something related to it comes up. That's what you want to be. Think of the long term. Don't think of just this one thing. Definitely don't be the kind of person who's like, "Oh no, I forgot to mention one thing." Like, that's not, the people don't pay that much close attention to news articles and stuff that they're reading or watching or listening to on the radio. The main thing is that to get your name known, and known of being an expert on a certain topic. Another thing I mentioned here is, like, don't talk about yourself unless you're the subject of the conversation. Obviously, you can throw in, as I talk about in my book, blah, blah, blah. But again, you want to be providing genuine, valuable kind of content to the situation, to the conversation, whatever it is. That's what you primarily want to be doing. Um, and a final tip I want to talk about is dealing with mistakes. I'm not talking about your mistakes. I'm talking about the mistakes that journalists and that inevitably make. If you've ever been lucky enough to get covered by a journalist for yourself or your book you've published or anything you've been involved in ever, you will know that basically, like, the old joke is that, like, there's going to be at least 3 mistakes in the article. It's going to be misspelled names, misattributed quotes, stuff like that. So the first thing to do is to don't overreact. The first thing to do is be polite. You can obviously be firm and aggressive later if it's important, but the first thing is to be polite. Treat it like it's an ordinary course of affairs for mistakes to be made. That the mistake was honest, that it wasn't intentional, and that it can be corrected. So be polite. Remember, if they actually have made a mistake, they might have legal ramifications and stuff like that. So you don't need to go, to 11 with your hair on fire if you see a mistake. Give them a chance to correct it. Be polite. Don't freak out. Hopefully, there will be more articles written about you in the future, and that's the reason not to make the hugest deal of it in the world. So, thank you very much, everyone, for watching this Lean Publishing tip of the day on talking to journalists as a book author.